In this video, we're going to look at SQLite in a bit more detail and see some more advanced things that we can do with it. So first off, very quick challenge. Can you change this code back into the users database and add 2 more users with any name and age you like? Go for it. Okay, I'm sure you managed that one. So all we need to do is change everything back. In fact, we don't need this line at all anymore because the table that we need definitely exists. And then we want to insert, it was just name, wasn't it, that we had, and age. And then we will add Kirsten, but we'll give her the ever young age of 21. And we mustn't forget Ralphie, of course. There we go. And then we'll just update these to name and age. And name and age. And we should probably update these as well, although of course it will work fine with those as what they were. Okay, so just checking there that we've got all of the users. I'll probably have a couple of other users as well from my testing. And it'd be good to update this as well to the correct table name. And there we go. We've got our users there. We've got Kirsten a couple of times, which is not a problem. And all I'm going to do is update this to user results so we can get exactly what we need. All right, so the first thing we're going to see is some more advanced queries. So let's say we wanted to get everyone below the age of 18. That's very easy to do using SQL. We just put a command at the end of our query that says where, and then we want age to be less than 18. Simple as that. And this general where clause we can use to restrict the search for any particular type of data in our database. There you go. You can see it's only returned Tommy and Ralphie there. We could search for a particular username. That's obviously very useful if you're trying to log someone in or something like that. Whoops. So we would just say where name is equal to Kirsten. And then we check that out, and that should just return the 2 Kirsten entries. And there they are. Okay. If you want to combine more than one search criteria, you can do that with the AND command. So if we wanted to look for the name being Kirsten and the age being, say, 22, we know that that's not going to return anything. So we get no new results there. There we go. But if we search for name is Kirsten and age is 21, then we should get the 2 Kirsten results. There we go. We can also do fancy things, and for example, if we wanted everyone that had a username that started with K, then we can do name like and then K and then a % symbol. And the % symbol essentially means anything. So that will search for anyone who has a username with a K at the beginning and then anything. So we've got Kirsten again there. We could also search for anyone who had a username with an O in it, for example. And then we've got 2% signs, % at the beginning and % at the end, and that just searches for anything and then an O and then anything else. So that should return me and Tommy. There we go. So Rob and Tommy returned. We can limit the number of results here. So let's say we just want one person with an O in their name, we just put limit 1 there. So that should return just me. There we go. So that's basic database queries. There's much more advanced stuff that you can do, but that should cover the vast majority of what you need. And if you need to do anything else, just search for SQL and then whatever you want to do, because this is, as I say, a standard server query language that has been around for a long time and is well documented on the web. Okay, so a couple of other things then. First off, let's see how we delete a user. So for example, we've got these duplicate Kirstens here. It'd be good to get rid of one of those so there's only one of them. So we can do that using eventsdb exec SQL, and we're still using eventsdb. I think that's not a major problem even though we're using the users DB. And the command to delete from a database is just delete from and then the table name. So users, and then you just put your limitations. So I'm going to say where name is equal to Kirsten. If I do that, of course, it will delete both of them. So I'm going to put a limit 1 on the end, and that will delete only one Kirsten. In fact, whenever you're updating or deleting a database, I would always recommend putting a limit on the end, because if there's a tiny chance that you've forgotten your where clause, or there's just some bad code, if it ends up deleting your whole database by mistake, or updating a value to the same thing for every row, for example, that can be a bit of a disaster. It's happened to me before, and so I would always strongly recommend putting limit 1 at the end of all your delete or update statements, where you expect only one row to be deleted. Okay, so we'll just run that again, and we should now get all of those users, but we'll have just the one Kirsten. Now it's actually getting a little bit tricky to see which are the results from this running of the app and which are previous ones, so I'm going to show you a way to clear the logs every time we run the app. So I just went to run and edit configurations, and then I'm going to click logcat and clear log before launch. So that's probably quite a good default setting, because it's unlikely you're going to want the logs of previous launches for very long anyway. So let's say we wanted to update one of these values and say change the age of someone in our database. Then we take eventsdb and execute an SQL statement, which would look like this. So we update users, and then let's say we want to update Ralphie to being 2. So we'd set age is equal to 2, and then we give our limit. So where name equals Ralphie. There we go. Simple as that. And that, as I say, is very standard SQL. So let's have a look now. There you go. You can see we've got the same results, but Ralphie is now 2. And we can use exactly the same where clauses as we looked at when we did the select statement. So now we know how to update existing records, add new ones, do quite advanced queries, and loop through the results of them. There's just a couple more things I want to show you, and first of all is deleting from the database. So let's say, for example, we want to delete Ralphie for some reason. Then all we do is delete from users and then our where clause. So where name equals Ralphie. Simple as that. So now when we run that, we should get the same results as before, but with no Ralphie. There we go. So Rob, Tommy, and Kirsten. One slightly odd thing, or at least I think it's slightly odd about SQLite, is that you can't just pop a limit on the end of a delete query. So if, for example, I wanted to get rid of one of the Kirstens there, then you might think I do that. And indeed, that works fine in MySQL, but we can't do that on SQLite. So before we see how to do that, I'm going to introduce the idea of an ID. And really recommend having an ID in any table that you use, because it's a way of referring to each row uniquely, which may be difficult if you've got two rows that are identical like we have here. So before we try and delete Kirsten, or at least one of her, unfortunately we can't add a primary key column to a table after it's been created, so we're going to need to create a new table, which is fine. Reminds us how to do it. So we want to create table if it doesn't exist, and I'll just call it new users. And this is going to have the same as before, so it's going to have name, which is a varchar, and age, which is going to be an integer with 3 digits. But now we're also going to have an ID, which is going to be an integer, and also a primary key. So this primary key will auto increment, which means it will start at 1 and then increase by 1 every time we add a new row to the table. So let's just add a couple of rows. There we go, and that all remains the same. And then we'll just close that bracket. So if we take a look now, we should find that we have Kirsten and Ralphie in our table and nobody else, but they will also have primary keys. So there they are, Kirsten and Ralphie. Let's just create a column here so that we can see our primary key. So it's the ID. There we go, and I'm happy to add them again because I'm going to delete one of them anyway. There we go. So you can see we've got Kirsten, Ralphie, but this time they've got an ID which is always unique. So even if I start deleting or messing around with rows, that ID will always be unique. So now if I wanted to get rid of one of those Kirstens, instead of having to refer to their name or age, I can refer to the ID, which is a much better way of deleting anyway. So if I delete where ID equals 1, then that will only delete the one user. And so because the ID key is unique, that will only ever delete one item in the table. So let's take a look. We should now have just one Kirsten and 2 Ralphies. But it would help if I change this to new users. Otherwise, I'm deleting from the wrong table. So checking that now, we really should just have one Kirsten and 2 Ralphies. And there you go. You can see the first one's gone, but we're left with the rest. And that's probably all you'll need to do with databases in your apps. We can now create them. We can create tables within them. We can add items to those tables. We can update and delete items as we need to. And then we can select the items using a range of criteria and then loop through the results and do something with them. All right, so we're going to be using all of that in our Hacker News app that we're going to make at the end of this section. But we've got one more thing to learn about before we can do that, and that is web views. And we'll see what they are and how we can use them in the next lecture.